Donald Trump's 28-point plan for the war in Ukraine, and right after that, the plan was I don't know who would we don't know still we don't know who published the plan, but we have the 28 points. It seems that uh, it seems that the Ukrainians were behind this, the publication of the plan. But when it comes to the plan, how did you find it? Do you think that it's going to be a common ground, or so some sort of foundation to make a resolution, a settlement in Ukraine?
Let me talk about it in some detail, and pardon me if I go on a bit. First of all, the document itself probably was leaked both by Kirill Dmitriev, a friend of Vladimir Putin, who met with Donald Trump's crony, Steve Witkoff, in Miami, and apparently cooked up this document. It's not clear that he had any authority from the Kremlin to actually commit anybody to anything, or even that the Kremlin was actually fully aware of what was in the document. It is a very amateurish effort. It reads more like a press release or a public relations release than a draft treaty. And it is full of contradictions. And it very typically, in the case of, all of the so-called pieces that Mr. Trump has arranged, follow a similar pattern. That is, very vague statements with all the really difficult stuff deferred for later discussion. So you basically have the proclamation of a fictitious peace. This has been the case with India, Pakistan, Thailand, Cambodia, Rwanda, Congo, and so on and so forth. It is very parallel to the Gaza so-called peace plan. Why? Because the people who are part of the plan were not consulted. The Europeans are saying, well, how can you do this behind the back of the Ukrainians and us? But that is exactly how the Palestinians were treated by Mr. Trump and Mr. Witkoff. And I don't recall any European raising objections to that in that context. Second, of course, in this case, since most people regard Ukraine as the victim of Russian aggression, whether the aggression was justified or not is a different question. But Ukrainians have suffered terribly in this war. And yet they are to be disarmed in part, actually not entirely. And that too parallels the Palestine agreement, not agreement because there was no agreement, the Palestine so-called peace plan. There have been accusations that Ukraine is being asked to give up all sorts of things and Russia is not. I don't think that is true. First of all, what Ukraine is asked to give up territorially is the 13 or 14% of Donetsk, which the Russians have yet to take. But I think most military experts believe that the Russian advance is accelerating, the Ukrainian army is crumbling, and it's only a matter of time before Russia does take that territory completely, that is Donetsk. That part of the Donetsk region under this plan would be demilitarized, and there would be an international supervision to ensure that the Russians did not place weapons there. The statement that Ukraine is losing something by agreeing not to go into NATO and to restore neutrality is also problematic for two reasons. First, of course, Russia recognized the independence of Ukraine on the basis that the Ukrainian constitution stipulated that Ukraine would be independent, and neutral, and so going back to that condition is not a novelty. It's nothing new. It's a restoration of the status quo ante. Second, the limitations on the Ukrainian armed forces and foreign forces in Ukraine are also not a surprise. Russia has always said from the very beginning that it could not tolerate foreign forces with weapons aimed at it in its Ukrainian neighbor. So that is also nothing new. And finally, I guess on the point of going to not joining NATO and adopting neutrality again, Europe and the United States have shown that we're not willing to fight for Ukraine. We're willing to arm Ukrainians to fight the Russians in order to weaken and isolate Russia, which hasn't succeeded. But we're not willing to apply Article 5 guarantees to Ukraine. So it's been clear for a long time that Ukraine was not going to get into NATO. Ukraine does gain some things from this, in addition to the demilitarization of the remaining portion of Donetsk that the Russians haven't taken. It gains a recognition of its sovereignty. It gains a formal Russian recognition of its eligibility to join the European Union. Well, whether it can do that or not is between the European Union and Ukraine. And the idea that the basic European objections to this are, well, we're rewarding aggression and blah, 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 and so forth and so on. But the fact is that the Europeans have neither the money nor the will to do anything to save Ukraine from the Russian advances that are occurring. They're not going to put their troops in there. Even the British, who proposed some kind of stabilization force, have made it clear they're not going to send troops to Ukraine without U.S. backing, and there will be no U.S. backing for that. That has been clear for quite a while. They don't have the money. There is a proposal by von der Leyen to issue bonds against the Russian assets that they have seized, the gold and dollar reserves that they seized. But they can't agree on that for very good reasons, because if they actually did that, it could well pull down the entire global financial system. If you're a bank, you can't take your customers' money and away from them. You have to respect their ownership. So the Belgians and others have objected to this, and it's going nowhere. And finally, even where the Europeans are, accelerating their rearmament, for example, the Germans increasing defense expenditure, they're doing this through debt issuance. They don't have revenue. They don't have the money. And none of them are willing to raise taxes to pay for things in Ukraine. So it's very strange that in this context, they somehow think they can demand that Russia capitulate, surrender, go back to before the war, except their desire that Russia be punished. One of the provisions in the draft press release, if you will, I don't think it's a treaty, it is that the criminal liability for human rights violations would be voided. That presumably mostly applies to the Russian accusations against the Russians, although I note that the Ukrainians do not have a good record on human rights either. So having this is, in other words, I'm saying, if you look at the details, there are a lot of problems with this. And particularly, we don't know whether it has any status at all. Did Mr. Dmitriev and Mr. Witkoff, in fact, have the backing of both Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump? It does not appear so. Yeah. But having said that, it is, as Vladimir Putin has reportedly said today, the case that this is a basis for a discussion. Why? Because to one extent or another, it actually addresses the Russian causes of the war. The root causes, Putin has always said he was willing to negotiate if the other side, meaning the United States, NATO, Ukraine, would take into account the root causes of the conflict. And of course, he showed that he was willing to do that during the Istanbul negotiations in March and April of 2022, right after the invasion of the Donbass and the attack on Kyiv, were launched by the Russian armed forces. So this could, in fact, be the basis for something, a mediation, maybe. Somebody like the Chinese or the UN coming in, maybe Brazil, again, with Turkey, coming in and mediating between the parties. This is not a product of mediation. This is simply a unilateral imposition of terms that Mr. Trump has ordained. And it won't work for that reason. You have to have the buy-in of those directly concerned. First, Ukraine and Russia, but then ultimately Europe and Russia and the United States. So this is in some senses an advance, but it's a very incomplete advance. And in this context, and I'll conclude with this, Mr. Trump demanding that Vladimir Zelensky sign up to this scheme before Thanksgiving, which is next Thursday, is ridiculous. That is very high-handed, and it will not succeed in getting that signature.
Yeah. Zelensky's reaction somehow was amazing, Ambassador. He said, you have a difficult choice, either losing dignity or risking the loss of our key sponsor, which is the United States. Do you think that if they achieve some sort of agreement, some sort of settlement, that would be losing dignity? What else? Because Ukraine is getting destroyed by this war.
Well, that's right. But of course, Ukrainian pride and the rhetorical backing by the West, particularly by the British, but by others as well, has led Ukraine to hold on to a position that is utterly unrealistic. It is being destroyed, as you said. Its army is crumbling. It is not holding its ground against the Russians. Its prospects of regaining any of the territories it's lost are very poor. It would, of course, under this proposed framework, it would, of course, regain the parts of Ukraine outside the Donbass region that the Russians have taken. But no, I would say Mr. Zelensky's reaction is understandable. He's been led down the garden path. Ukraine has been taken advantage of. It has been abused. He ran on a platform for peace. He reversed that under Western and ultranationalist pressures. He's been out on a limb, and now the limb is being sawn off the tree, and he's going to fall. And there is an issue here because all this is occurring right in the midst of a corruption crisis, which touches Zelensky personally. The immediate cause is some of his immediate advisors who stole $100 million. They've all fled to Israel, apparently. There's a real question about how long he can remain in power. And in fact, one reason this framework may in fact become the basis for a discussion is that Mr. Zelensky may not be in power much longer. There's a lot of war fatigue. Many people in Ukraine are realistic about prospects, even if Mr. Zelensky, for various reasons, wants to pose as unaccepting of reality. The other part of this, finally, is, of course, that clearly Mr. Zelensky, when the U.S. Secretary of the Army and two generals visited Kyiv a little while ago to brief Zelensky on the proposal, they obviously told him that if he didn't accept it, he would be cut off from American support. What sort of support? Well, Ukraine can't do anything without American intelligence support. And of course, as I said earlier, the United States has handed the bag to Europe. Europe doesn't have the capability to do anything beyond what it is already doing. So Mr. Zelensky does indeed face a hard choice. But the best choice he could make would be to be realistic.